January 29th, 1945, 0600 hours. A desolate, mud-slicked road 5 kilometers north of Cabanatuan, Nueva Ecija, Philippines. The dawn did not bring light. It merely dragged a pale, gray, suffocating heat over the tropical landscape. Along the narrow dirt track, a column of 500 Allied prisoners of war stumbled blindly forward. They were the walking ghosts of the Pacific, survivors of the Bataan Death March and 3 years of systematic starvation inside the Cabanatuan prison camp. Their uniforms had long since rotted away into grease-stained rags, their ribs pressed sharply against skin leathered by malaria, beriberi, and the relentless tropical sun. "Keep moving! Hayaku!" screamed a Japanese guard, slamming the butt of his Type 99 rifle into the shoulder of a lagging British corporal. The soldier collapsed into the deep mud, his eyes vacant, unable to find the strength to stand. Beside him, Captain Redmond of the U.S. Army's 27th Bomb Group caught the falling man by his arm, hauling his skeletal frame back into the line of march. "Keep your feet, mate," Redmond hissed through cracked, bleeding lips. "You drop on this road, and they'll bayonet you before you hit the dirt. Keep moving."
The guards were on edge. The American forces under General MacArthur had landed at Lingayen Gulf weeks prior and were advancing rapidly toward Manila. The Japanese High Command had issued a terrifying directive: the War Ministry Murder Order. No prisoners were to fall into Allied hands alive. This march wasn't a relocation. It was a slow-moving execution. The 500 men were being driven toward a hidden ravine where machine gun pits had already been dug. Through the dense kogon grass lining the road, a pair of dark, motionless eyes watched the column pass. Hunched low in the brush, completely invisible to the passing guards, was Captain Juan Pajota of the Filipino guerrillas. He wore no uniform, only a sweat-stained shirt and a bandolier of ammunition slung across his chest. His hand rested on the wooden stock of a worn M1 carbine. He noted the positions of the guards, the heavy machine gun truck idling at the rear, and the absolute vulnerability of the prisoners. Pajota looked back into the deep shadows of the jungle behind him. He wasn't alone. Deep within the canopy, a highly specialized elite force had just completed an impossible journey. They had marched 30 miles behind enemy lines in total silence, navigating through thousands of retreating Japanese troops. They were the men of the U.S. Army's 6th Ranger Battalion, led by the towering, unyielding Lieutenant Colonel Mucci.
But they were outnumbered nearly 10-1 by the surrounding Japanese garrisons. If they attacked the column directly on the open road, the guards would use the POWs as human shields, turning the rescue into a slaughterhouse. They needed a miracle. They needed something to shatter the enemy's focus, to make them look anywhere but at the road. Suddenly, from the cloudless blue sky directly above the valley, a low, smooth mechanical drone began to echo off the distant Sierra Madre Mountains. It was a single, solitary American aircraft, a P-61 Black Widow night fighter, painted an ink-black color that seemed to absorb the tropical sun. The Japanese guards froze, their rifles instantly tracking upward as the Black Predator began to circle low over the column. The diversion was about to begin.
January 29th, 1945, 0612 hours. The sky directly above the Cabanatuan March corridor. The sleek, twin-engine P-61 Black Widow did not drop bombs or open fire with its 20mm cannons. Instead, the pilot, Captain Kenneth Schreiber, began a performance of sheer aeronautical theater designed to paralyze the enemy's attention. He chopped the throttles, letting the massive black fighter stall out until it was barely skimming the tops of the bamboo groves, less than 200 feet above the Japanese column. "Look at that crazy bastard," a guard gasped, his Type 99 rifle tracking the bizarre low-altitude maneuvers. Schreiber cut one engine entirely, feathering the propeller until the massive blade stood completely still in the air. The aircraft tipped violently on its side, performing a series of stomach-churning side slips and mock stalls right over the primary machine gun truck. To the Japanese commanders on the ground, it appeared as though a top-secret American aircraft was experiencing a catastrophic mechanical failure and was about to crash directly into their lines. Every single eye in the Japanese vanguard, nearly 80 guards and transport drivers, was glued to the sky, tracking the tumbling black shape. They were completely mesmerized. "Now," Colonel Mucci whispered from the edge of the irrigation ditch bordering the eastern side of the road.
The ghost soldiers did not drop from parachutes. They materialized like spirits directly from the earth. The Kogon grass, which had seemed completely empty a heartbeat prior, exploded into a synchronized wall of absolute violence. 90 elite U.S. Army Rangers, alongside Pajota's hardened Filipino guerrillas, rose from the brush at point-blank range. Rat-tat-tat-tat-tat! The clearing erupted into a crossfire of devastating intensity. The Rangers, armed with M1 Garins, heavy .30 caliber Browning automatic rifles, BARs, and Thompson submachine guns, unleashed an unyielding sheet of lead into the flank of the Japanese guard line. The 3 guards who had been tormenting the British corporal were instantly cut down before they could even lower their rifles from the sky. Get down! Get down on the deck!" Captain Redmond screamed, lunging forward to tackle the frail corporal into the deep, muddy ditch as a hail of tracer rounds zipped inches over their heads. The 500 Allied prisoners, acting on survival instincts honed by years of captivity, threw themselves flat into the ruts of the road. They became a carpet of living men beneath a canopy of screaming steel.
The Japanese machine gun truck at the rear tried to pivot its heavy Type 92 gun toward the ditch, but a 2-man Ranger team had already anticipated the move. A bazooka rocket streaked through the tall grass, striking the truck's engine block with a blinding orange flash. The vehicle erupted into a violent secondary explosion of fuel and ammunition, throwing a pillar of black smoke into the morning air. The ambush was mathematically perfect, completely severing the guards from their weapons in the first 30 seconds of the engagement. But the real danger lay just 2 kilometers up the road, where a garrison of over 1,000 fully armed Japanese infantrymen was currently stationed at the main Cabanatuan compound. The ghost soldiers had broken the column, but now they had to hold the line against a tidal wave of oncoming reinforcements.
January 29th, 1945, 0620 hours. The Cabanatuan bridgehead, 1 kilometer north of the prisoner column. The thunderous crump of the bazooka blast and the rattle of automatic gunfire echoed down the valley, instantly alerting the main Japanese garrison. Within minutes, the wooden timbers of the nearby Cabanatuan bridge began to groan. Over 800 fully armed Japanese reinforcements, supported by a platoon of Type 95 Hago light tanks, surged out of the main compound, sprinting down the road toward the ambush site. If they breached the corridor, the 500 skeletal POWs would be completely cornered and wiped out in the open. But Captain Juan Pajota and his Filipino guerrillas had already turned the bridge into a fortress of the damned. Crouched behind sandbags and log breastworks at the southern terminus of the bridge, Pajota checked the action of his Bren gun. Beside him, a guerrilla gunner adjusted the tripod of a heavy, water-cooled .50 caliber machine gun. "They're coming!" a spotter yelled, pointing through the morning haze. The Japanese vanguard charged onto the narrow wooden span, their bayonets catching the first bright rays of the tropical sun. They screamed a collective banzai cry that rattled off the riverbanks. "Hold your fire," Pajota muttered, his eyes locked on the lead officer waving a Shingunto sword. "Hold." The enemy reached the midpoint of the bridge. "Fire!" The southern bank of the river exploded in a synchronized sheet of flame. The heavy .50 caliber machine gun tore into the wooden planks of the bridge, the massive half-inch rounds shredding the timber and the oncoming infantry with terrifying kinetic force. The lead Japanese wave was instantly cut down, their bodies tumbling into the swift current of the Pampanga River below. Simultaneously, a team of guerrillas detonated a series of crude, improvised explosive charges wired directly to the bridge's central support pillars. A concussive boom rocked the valley, throwing a massive cloud of splinters and black mud into the air. The center span of the bridge buckled and collapsed into the water, severing the primary highway and stranding the Japanese tanks on the opposite bank. "They're trapped on the other side!" a guerrilla shouted, reloading his rifle. But the Japanese commanders refused to halt. Driven by the fanatical directive to eliminate the prisoners, the infantry plunged directly into the chest-deep water of the river, abandoning their heavy equipment and wading across the current under a relentless hail of American and Filipino crossfire. A kilometer down the road, Colonel Mucci's Rangers were already moving among the prisoners. The scene was a chaotic blur of liberation. "Can you walk, soldier?" a burly Ranger asked, hoisting an emaciated American pilot onto his shoulders. "I can crawl if I have to, son," the pilot gasped, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face.
"You don't have to crawl anymore," the Ranger replied, turning back toward the jungle. "The 6th Rangers have the perimeter. Move! Move toward the tree line." The ghost soldiers had formed a human shield around the 500 broken men, holding back a roaring tide of enemy reinforcements with nothing but raw grit, overlapping machine gun fire, and a refusal to let a single man be left behind.
January 29th, 1945, 06:45 hours, the edge of the jungle heading toward Allied lines. The Pampanga River was running red, but the line at the bridgehead held. Captain Pajota's guerrillas, firing until their rifle barrels blistered, threw back 3 consecutive waves of waiting Japanese infantry. The collapsed bridge and the fierce, unexpected wall of defensive fire bought the Rangers the ultimate currency of the raid: time. Down the long dirt road, the evacuation was a triage in motion. The 500 liberated prisoners were moving, but they were a column of absolute fragility. Some were carried on the backs of rugged Rangers. Others were hoisted onto crude wooden carts pulled by local carabaos, water buffaloes, that the Filipino villagers had rapidly brought out from the surrounding rice paddies to assist the rescue. Captain Redmond walked on his own 2 feet, his skeletal hand gripping the shoulder strap of a young Ranger private to steady his trembling legs. He looked back over his shoulder. The sky over the road was painted with the black smoke of the destroyed Japanese machine gun truck, but the gunfire at the river was finally beginning to slacken. "We're breaking contact, Captain," the private said, guiding Redmond into the thick, protective shadows of the jungle canopy. "The guerrillas are melting into the brush. The Nips won't be able to track us through the hills."
Colonel Mucci stood at the absolute rear of the retreating column, his trench knife in one hand and a Colt 45 in the other. He didn't step into the jungle until the last British corporal, the last American pilot, and the last Filipino scout had crossed the threshold of the tree line. His face was etched with a grim satisfaction. They had done the mathematically impossible. They had infiltrated 30 miles into a hornet's nest, completely obliterated a brutal guard force, held off an entire garrison, and liberated 500 men without losing a single prisoner. As the dense tropical foliage closed in behind them, swallowing the sound of the dying battle, the silence of the jungle returned. The ghost soldiers had slipped back into the shadows from whence they came, but they were no longer alone. They were marching a column of the living back home. For 3 long years, the men of Cabanatuan had been forgotten by the world, written off as casualties of a brutal early war defeat. But as the morning sun finally filtered through the high jungle canopy, casting long golden bars of light across the column of emaciated, weeping, yet profoundly free men, they realized the truth. The world hadn't forgotten them. The Rangers had come, and the long night of their captivity was finally over.